What happens when an act of devastating humiliation collides with an unexpected moment of grace? When a billionaire heiress is abandoned at the altar, where does she run? And who is the one person who can truly see the woman behind the fortune? This is the story of a beggar, a runaway bride, and a secret so profound it would redefine the very meaning of wealth and legacy. Please, friends, like and subscribe if you enjoy this story. The air in the Cathedral of the Pentecost was thick with the scent of 1,000 white orchids, flown in from Thailand and arranged with an almost aggressive perfection. The perfume was so potent it felt like a physical presence, a sweet, suffocating blanket over the assembled who's who of Lagos high society. Diamond-encrusted wrists glittered under the meticulously calibrated lighting, and the low hum of conversation was a symphony of power, privilege, and carefully veiled judgment. At the center of this opulent stage stood Adaora Nwadike. At 25, she was the living embodiment of a fairy tale, her slender frame sheathed in a custom-designed ivory lace gown that had taken a team of Parisian artisans 6 months to create. A diamond tiara, a Nwadike heirloom, sat atop her intricately braided hair, its weight both literal and symbolic. She was the princess in her tower, the prize, the final glittering piece in the consolidation of two of Nigeria's most powerful dynasties. Her fiancé, Emeka Okoro, stood beside her, handsome and vacuous as a store window mannequin. His smile was a brilliant, practiced flash for the cameras, but his eyes, when Adaora dared a glance, were distant, focused somewhere over the heads of the 500 guests. Their courtship had been a carefully choreographed series of photo ops and business mergers disguised as dates. He was the scion of the Okoro shipping empire, she was the sole heiress to the Nwadike oil and telecom fortune. Together they were a stock market rally, a headline, a power couple. They were everything and they were nothing at all. The pressure is immense, no? Her mother had whispered fiercely an hour earlier, adjusting Adaora's veil with hands that were perfectly manicured and cold as ice. But this is our legacy. This is what we have built. You will smile and you will be perfect. Perfect. The word echoed in Adaora's mind as the organist began the first triumphant chords of Wagner's bridal chorus. The congregation rose as one, a rustle of expensive silks and suits. This was it. The moment she had been groomed for her entire life. But as she took her first step down the endless aisle on her father's arm, a strange hollowing opened up inside her. The smiles of the guests looked like grimaces. The joyful music felt like a funeral dirge. She was walking towards a life sentence, her gilded cage being furnished in real time. She reached the altar. Emeka took her hand. His palm was damp. The archbishop began his homily, his voice a sonorous drone about unity, God's blessing, and the sanctity of marriage. Adaora's gaze drifted over the sea of faces, her father's stern, proud expression, her mother's tearful, performative joy, the envious glances of her peers. It was all a magnificent show, and she was the lead actress, forgetting her lines. A subtle commotion at the side door snagged her attention. One of her bridesmaids, Kayamika, was whispering frantically to the chief usher, her face ashen. The usher's eyes widened, darting towards Adaora and Emeka before he discreetly slipped a smartphone from his pocket. A cold dread, sharp and immediate, began to coil in Adaora's stomach. Something was wrong. The archbishop paused, clearing his throat. If any person present knows of any reason why this man and this woman should not be joined in holy matrimony, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. It was a rhetorical question, a formality. But in the silence that followed, the chief usher, looking as if he were walking to his own execution, began to slowly, painfully, make his way down the side aisle towards Emeka. A collective, silent gasp seemed to suck the air from the cathedral. Emeka dropped Adaora's hand as if it had burned him. He leaned in, the usher whispered a few frantic words and handed him the phone. Adaora watched the color drain from Emeka's face. His brilliant smile vanished, replaced by a mask of sheer panic. He stared at the screen, his jaw clenched. He then looked at Adaora, not with apology but with a kind of trapped, animal fear. Without a word, he shoved the phone back into the usher's hands, turned on his heel and began walking, quickly, then at a near run, back down the aisle he had so confidently strolled minutes before. The silence in the cathedral was now absolute, broken only by the rustle of his retreating footsteps and the disbelieving intake of 500 breaths. A single, sharp, electronic ping sounded from the phone in the usher's trembling hand. He looked down, his eyes scanning the screen, and then he looked at Adaora, his expression one of pure pity. You didn't need to say it. She knew. With a trembling hand, she took the phone. The screen glowed with a message that was now being silently transmitted across the congregation via 100 other hidden devices. Emeka, I can't do this. The pressure is too much. It's not you. It's this whole circus. I'm sorry. Don't hate me. The words were not just a rejection. They were an annihilation. They stripped her not just of a husband, but of her dignity, her value, her entire constructed identity. The perfect heiress, abandoned on the altar. She would be a laughingstock. A pity project. The poor Nwadike girl. The weight of the tiara suddenly felt unbearable. The 1,000 orchids smelled like decay. The stares of the congregation were no longer envious but voyeuristic, feasting on her public evisceration. A single hot tear of pure, undiluted rage traced a path through her meticulously applied makeup. It was not a tear for Emeka, but for herself, for the gilded trap of her life. And in that moment, something in her broke. Or perhaps something was finally set free. Without a sound, she let the phone clatter to the marble floor. She turned her back on the stunned archbishop, on her horrified parents, on the entire suffocating spectacle. And with her head held high, the train of her million-naira gown sweeping behind her like a royal dismissal, Adaora Nwadike walked out of the cathedral, leaving the altar of her emptiness behind. The Lagos sun was a physical assault. It hammered down on Adaora's bare shoulders, a brutal and immediate shock after the cathedral's refrigerated air. The delicate hand-stitched lace of her gown, which had felt so exquisite moments before, was now a heavy, suffocating shroud. Each diamond sewn into the bodice seemed to capture the harsh light and focus it into a pinprick of heat against her skin. She walked. It was the only thing her body knew how to do. The cathedral spires receded behind her, replaced by the vibrant, chaotic tapestry of Ikoyi. The world, which had been holding its breath in hushed reverence, now screamed back to life in a riot of sound and color. A bus conductor hung from his moving vehicle, yelling destinations into the thick air. Oberland. The pungent, savory scent of suya smoke from a roadside grill mixed with the ever-present haze of petrol fumes and dust. A woman balancing a towering tray of plantains on her head skillfully navigated the crowd, her voice a sharp, melodic call. No one recognized her. In this world, she was not Adaora Nwadike, the abandoned billionaire bride. She was just a woman in an absurdly expensive, now dusty white dress, her face a mask of streaked mascara and desolation. The anonymity was a balm. The cathedral's pity had been a subtle poison. The city's raw indifference was a strange kind of mercy. Her heels, delicate satin slippers, caught on the broken pavement. The strap snapped. She stumbled, the final shred of her compuncture breaking with it. The strength drained from her legs and she sank onto a low, grimy curb, her voluminous gown pooling around her like a fallen angel. She buried her face in her hands, the weight of the humiliation finally, fully crushing her. The tears came then, not the single proud tear of the cathedral, but silent, racking sobs that shook her entire frame. From his designated patch of shade against a faded blue wall, Kola watched her. This was his domain, this small slice of pavement outside the bustling Ikoyi market. He knew its rhythms, its characters, its unspoken rules. He saw the well-dressed men and women who passed by every day, their eyes sliding over him as if he were part of the infrastructure, invisible, insignificant. This woman was different. She was a storm of disruption, a splash of surreal, opulent white in the dusty palette of the street. He saw not the wealth her dress proclaimed, but the absolute wreckage in her posture. Her despair was a language he understood fluently. It was the same language spoken in the hollow eyes of the homeless man who slept under the bridge, the same quiet surrender of the mother begging for milk for her child. He watched the hawkers point and snicker. He saw the curious, intrusive stares. He saw a paparazzo, his long lens pointed like a weapon, skulking behind a parked Danfo bus. Her pain was becoming a public spectacle. Slowly, deliberately, Kola set aside his worn plastic bowl. This was not a transaction. This was a necessity. He shuffled towards her, his own movements a testament to a life of hardship. He didn't stand over her. Instead, he lowered himself to sit on the curb a few respectful feet away, the heat of the concrete seeping through his thin trousers. He didn't speak for a long moment, simply allowing his presence to be a quiet counterpoint to her isolation. When he finally did, his voice was low and raspy, worn smooth by the city's grit. "Ma," he said softly. "The sun here is too harsh for a heart that is already heavy." Adaora flinched, startled. She looked up, her beautiful face ravaged by tears. She expected a request for money, a leer, a curse. Instead, she met a pair of deep, calm eyes that held no judgment, only a profound and weary understanding. He held out a small, surprisingly clean piece of folded cloth, a handkerchief. Hesitantly she took it. The simple, unexpected kindness was a chisel that cracked the dam of her pride. Thank you, she whispered, her voice hoarse. They say the city has no memory, Kola continued, his gaze fixed on the ceaseless flow of traffic. This is both its cruelty and its blessing. The shame you feel today, it will be forgotten by tomorrow. The city will have a new scandal. A new tragedy. Your pain is yours to keep or to release. The city does not care. His words were not platitudes. They were hard-won truths. He spoke of losing everything, of the freedom that could be found in having nothing left to lose. He told her about the old woman who sold akra down the street, who had lost her entire family but still had a laugh that could light up the whole block. He spoke of the small, defiant act of finding a cool spot of shade on a hot day, or the taste of a clean cup of water. He did not ask her what was wrong. He simply acknowledged that something was wrong, and that it was allowed to be. For Adaora, it was the first real conversation she'd had in years. It wasn't about mergers or stock prices or social calendars. It was about survival. It was about the raw, unvarnished business of being human. In this man, this beggar, she found a wisdom her Ivy League education had never offered. He was a philosopher king of the pavement, and his throne was a dusty curb. It was in this moment of strange, quiet connection that the paparazzo struck. The camera shutter clicked, rapid and invasive, a sound as out of place as a gunshot. The spell was broken. Adaora's head snapped up. The world, with all its ugliness and intrusion, came rushing back. But something had shifted inside her. The paralyzing humiliation had been tempered by a new, simmering anger. And the man beside her had given her a new perspective, a lens through which to see her gilded cage for what it truly was. She stood up, brushing the dust from her ruined gown. She looked at Kola, really looked at him, seeing the man, not his circumstance. Thank you, she said again, her voice stronger now, laced with a newfound resolve. She had no plan, only a direction, away from the life that had brought her here. As she walked away, leaving the cathedral and the curb behind, the photo was already racing across the internet. But the caption they would write, "Mad Heiress and the Beggar," was a lie. The truth was far more dangerous. It was the story of a queen, dethroned and humiliated, who had just received her first true lesson in power from the most unlikely of tutors. The silence in the Nwadike mansion was a physical presence, thick and heavy as velvet, and far more oppressive than the city's noise had been. Adaora stood in the center of the vast living room, still in her dirt-streaked wedding gown, a solitary statue in a museum of priceless artifacts. Her father, Chief Nwadike, paced like a caged leopard, his custom-tailored igbata swirling around him with each furious turn. Do you have any idea what you have done? He thundered, his voice echoing off the marble floors. Any idea? The news channels are having a carnival. My phone has not stopped ringing. The Okoro family is demanding explanations. Our stock price is dipping. He stopped in front of her, his face a mask of incredulous rage. And you were sitting on the ground, talking to filth. He showed me more kindness in 5 minutes than Emeka did in a year, Adaora said, her voice quiet but clear. It was the first time she had spoken since returning. Kindness? Her mother, Neka, spat the word out as if it were poison. She sat rigidly on a gold-trimmed sofa, a handkerchief clutched in her hand, not for tears of sorrow but of fury. Kindness does not pay shareholders, Adaora. Kindness does not protect a legacy. That man is a parasite, a disease from the gutter. And you have dragged our name through it. My name, Adaora corrected, a spark igniting in her eyes. You were all too happy to let me bear it alone at that altar. Do not be clever with me. Chief Nwadike roared, slamming his fist on a glass table, making the crystal figurines upon it tremble. This ends now. You will issue a statement. A nervous breakdown. The stress of the wedding. We will pack you off to Switzerland for a few months until this blows over. And then what? Adaora asked, her gaze sweeping from her father's purple face to her mother's stony one. Then I come back and you find another Emeka? Another suitable merger? I am not a subsidiary to be acquired. You are our daughter. Her mother cried, standing up. And you will do as you are told. This madness ends now. You will never see that beggar again. It was the wrong thing to say. The word, madness, the command, the utter dismissal of the one person who had offered her solace. It fused her simmering defiance into cold, hard steel. No, Adaora said. The word hung in the air, simple and absolute. What did you say? Her father whispered, the quiet more dangerous than his shouting. I said no. She took a step forward, the torn hem of her gown whispering against the floor. You are right about one thing. That man Kola has nothing. No name, no money, no legacy. Which means he has nothing to lose by being kind. He has nothing to gain from me but my company. For the first time in my life, someone looked at me and saw a person, not a portfolio. And I will not let you take that from me. You are throwing your life away. Her mother shrieked, her composure finally shattering. No, mother, Adora replied, a sad, knowing smile touching her lips. For the first time I am picking it up. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving her parents in stunned, speechless fury. The battle lines were drawn. The following weeks were a war of attrition played out in the society pages and the cavernous silence of the mansion. Her parents froze her accounts, confiscated her cars, and had her followed. But Adora had a small, secret weapon, the trust fund from her grandmother, matrilineal and untouchable by her father. It was enough. She found Kola at his usual spot. His eyes widened in surprise, not at her presence but at the determined fire in hers. They think I'm mad, she told him without preamble. They think this is a rebellion that will pass. And is it? Kola asked, his gaze steady, searching her face. I don't know, she answered honestly. But I know that when I was at my lowest, you were my refuge. I know that your silence is more comforting than their speeches. I want to know if that is enough to build something on. Kola was silent for a long time, looking at this woman who was a tempest of privilege and pain. I have nothing to offer you but myself, he said finally. And that is a poor offering. It is the only one I have ever wanted, she said. The wedding was a stark, almost clinical affair. It took place at the Ikoyi Registry, a functional room with scuffed linoleum floors and the faint smell of disinfectant. There were no guests, only 2 required witnesses, a nervous junior lawyer from her grandmother's old firm and a street vendor from whom Adora often bought roasted corn, whom Kola had insisted on. Adora wore a simple, elegant cream-colored suit, a world away from her wedding gown. Kola wore a new, affordable navy blue suit that he had bought with his first month's pay from a temporary job she knew nothing about. His hands were rough, but his touch was gentle as he slid a plain gold band onto her finger. The registrar's voice was a monotone, reciting the legal statutes that bound them. There was no talk of God or legacy or eternal love. There was only the law, and beneath it, a quiet, desperate, mutual promise of a different kind of life. When the registrar pronounced them man and wife, there was no applause, no cheering. Just a profound, echoing silence. Kola leaned in and brushed a kiss against her cheek, a gesture of heartbreaking tenderness. As they stepped out of the registry, they were met by a wall of flashing cameras and shouted questions. Mad heiress weds beggar. Has she lost her mind? Adora ignored them all. She looked at Kola, her husband, his face a mixture of bewilderment and a dawning, fierce protectiveness. They had no plan, no blueprint for what came next. They only had a shared, defiant vow, made not in a cathedral before God and society, but in a dusty street and a government office, a vow to defy every expectation and build a new world from the ashes of the old. The madness, as her parents called it, had just begun. Their new home was a 3-bedroom apartment in a modest, well-kept building in Yaba, a world away from the fortress-like seclusion of Ikoyi. Sunlight streamed through unadorned windows, illuminating walls painted a simple, warm white. The furniture was functional, bought from a middle-class furniture store, and there wasn't a single antique or piece of art worth more than a small car. To Adora, it was the most beautiful place she had ever seen. It was theirs. The first few weeks were a delicate, unspoken dance of adjustment. Kola insisted on paying his share from the salary he earned as a community liaison for a property development firm, a job he had secured on his own merit, his intimate knowledge of the local communities making him an unexpectedly valuable asset. He would leave early, dressed in neat, affordable trousers and a shirt, and return in the evening, often with a fresh mango or a small bunch of flowers. Adora, for her part, learned the simple, profound mathematics of a normal life. She learned to brew tea on a stove, not ring for a maid. She learned the price of a loaf of bread and the delicate art of haggling with the market women for vegetables, a skill they found endearing and she found empowering. In the evenings, they would sit on their small balcony watching the city lights blink on and talk. They talked about everything: his day navigating complex community grievances, her childhood filled with tutors and isolation, their hopes, their fears. It was a conversation that had no end because for the first time, they were both truly being heard. It was from these conversations that Adora's new purpose was born. Listening to Kola speak of the systemic struggles, the lack of clean water, the crumbling schools, the sheer entrepreneurial energy stifled by a lack of opportunity, she saw the Nwadike Foundation with new, critical eyes. One evening, she spread the foundation's annual report on their simple dining table. "Look at this," she said, her finger tracing a line item. 50 million naira for a youth empowerment gala. The canapes alone cost 10 million. What does that actually do? It empowers caterers and decorators. It doesn't put a single tool in a young mechanic's hand. Kola looked over her shoulder, his presence calm and solid. "The people I know," he said softly, "they don't need galas. They need a borehole that doesn't run dry. They need a microloan to buy a second sewing machine. They need a safe place for their children to play after school so they can work." A fire ignited in Adaora's belly. This was a language she understood: leverage, impact, ROI. But now the return was measured in human dignity, not naira. Using her grandmother's trust fund as seed capital, she began quietly diverting the foundation's resources. She bypassed the expensive Lagos-based event planners and partnered directly with local community leaders Kola vouched for. The Youth Empowerment Gala budget was slashed, and the funds were redirected into a tool-lending library for aspiring mechanics and carpenters in Ajigunle. She didn't just write checks, she visited the projects. She stood in the dust of a half-built community hall, listening to the foreman, her designer jeans forgotten in her wardrobe. She tasted the water from a newly repaired borehole in a remote village, the clean, cool taste of victory sweeter than any champagne. She was no longer Lady Bountiful descending from on high, she was a partner, a collaborator. And by her side always was Kola, the bridge between her world and this one, his quiet authority and genuine respect from the people opening doors no amount of money could. Yet, amidst this newfound harmony, a single mystery remained. In the corner of their bedroom, tucked under Kola's side of the bed, was the old, battered leather suitcase he had arrived with. It was the one possession from his past life he had kept. It was always locked. He never opened it and he never spoke of it. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of the night, Adaora would watch him sleep and her eyes would drift to that suitcase. It was a black hole in their otherwise transparent lives, a silent testament to a history he refused to claim. She respected his privacy too much to ask, but a small, quiet part of her wondered what ghosts were locked inside. Was it a photograph? A letter? The remnants of a life so painful he had to bury it completely? It was the one piece of her husband she did not know, the one secret in their world of simple, hard-won truth. And so, the suitcase sat, a silent, patient question mark in the heart of their happiness. The request from the Nwadike Foundation's board was urgent. A detailed audit trail for the Ajigunle Tool Library project was needed by noon the next day to appease a skittish, major international donor. The digital files were a mess. Adaora knew the only complete, signed copies of the vendor contracts and community agreements were in the physical project folder. She had last seen it in Kola's study, a small second bedroom they had crammed with a desk and bookshelves. She ransacked the desk, her frustration mounting as minutes ticked by. It wasn't there. Her eyes swept the room and landed on the one place she never looked, the space under the fold-out sofa where Kola stored his old suitcase. A cold, pragmatic thought cut through her panic. He must have moved it. Maybe he put the folder in there for safekeeping. The suitcase was tucked away, its scarred leather surface dusty. She pulled it out, the weight of it surprising her. It felt full. The small, cheap padlock securing it seemed almost an insult to its sturdy presence. This was no mere container for a few mementos. This was a vault. "Kola," she called out, her voice tight with stress. There was no answer. He was at a community meeting across town, his phone likely off. The deadline loomed. The donor was threatening to pull funding for 3 other vital projects. Hundreds of people depended on this. Her principles warred with her practicality. She had promised herself she would never violate his trust. But this was for the community, for the work they had built together. Surely he would understand. With a trembling hand, she retrieved a hairpin from her bun. It felt like a betrayal, the metal cold against her fingers. Jiggling it in the cheap lock, she felt a cheap click. The lock sprang open. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum of guilt and necessity. She took a deep breath and lifted the lid. The top layer was innocuous. A few worn cotton shirts, a pair of faded trousers, the simple, humble wardrobe of the man she had met. But beneath them, her fingers brushed against something smooth and stiff. Leather. She pushed the clothes aside. There, lying flat at the bottom of the case, was a sleek, sealed, leather-bound portfolio. It was of a quality so fine, so unmistakably expensive, that it seemed like an alien artifact in the shabby suitcase. It was the kind of portfolio her father's lawyers used for multi-billion naira contracts. A cold dread, entirely separate from her missing folder, began to creep up her spine. This was not a photo album. This was not a bundle of old letters. With numb fingers, she undid the leather tie and opened it. The world tilted. The hum of the air conditioner faded into a distant roar. On top was a share certificate. The company name was Xeno Technologies, a startup that had been a whisper in tech circles 5 years ago and was now a household name, a unicorn valued in the billions of dollars. The number of shares listed was staggering. The name on the certificate was not Kola. It was Chi Jayok Bello Masari. Beneath it was a land deed. The location was a massive, prime, undeveloped tract of land in the heart of Abuja. The size of the plot made her family's Ikoyi compound look like a postage stamp. The name on the deed was the same, Chi Jayok Bello Masari. She knew that name. Everyone in Nigeria who read the business pages knew the name Masari. Alhaji Bello Masari, the legendary reclusive industrialist who had died a decade ago. A man known for his brutal business acumen and his even more brutal parenting style. The pieces, once unthinkable, slammed together with the force of a physical blow. The quiet dignity. The profound, hard-won wisdom. The refusal to be pitted. The way he spoke of failure and shame. He wasn't a man who had never had anything. He was a man who had lost everything. Or rather, a man who had walked away from everything. The missing project folder was forgotten. She sat back on her heels, the portfolio heavy in her lap, the crisp papers feeling like accusations. The man she loved, the man she had built this simple, honest life with, was not who she thought he was. He was a ghost. A prince in a pauper's skin. The sound of the front door opening made her jump. Kola's familiar footsteps sounded in the hallway. Idora? I'm back. The meeting ran long. She didn't answer. She couldn't. She heard him pause, then his footsteps approached the study door. He stood in the doorway, his gaze taking in the open suitcase, the clothes scattered on the floor, and the open portfolio in her lap. The color drained from his face. The calm, steady composure he always wore shattered, replaced by a raw, gut-wrenching look of shame and fear. It was the look of a man whose deepest, most carefully guarded secret had been unearthed. For a long moment, the only sound was the frantic beating of her own heart. She finally found her voice, a hoarse, disbelieving whisper that hung in the space between them. Kola, she breathed, holding up the damning deed. Who are you? The silence in the study was a chasm, wider and deeper than the one in the cathedral on her wedding day. Kola stood frozen in the doorway, a man watching his carefully reconstructed world crumble at his feet. The look on his face was not one of anger at her intrusion, but of a profound, ancient shame, as if she had discovered a corpse he had been hiding for years. Slowly, he walked into the room and sank onto the sofa, his shoulders slumping under an invisible, crushing weight. He did not look at the portfolio in her lap, but at his own rough, work-worn hands. Chi Jayok Bello Masari, he began, the name sounding foreign and heavy on his tongue. That was the boy my father raised. He was given everything and taught to value nothing. His voice was a low, weary monotone, stripped of all its usual gentle strength. When I graduated, he sat me down in his study, a room larger than this entire apartment. He said, "A man who inherits his empire did not build it. He is only its caretaker, and a weak caretaker breeds ruin." He gave me a small stipend and the deed to that land in Abuja. "Build your own path," he said. "Make your own fortune. Then and only then will you be worthy of the Masari name." He finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and in them, Adaora saw the ghost of a proud, terrified young man. "I was so arrogant. I thought it would be easy. I invested in friends and ideas I didn't understand. The tech shares were a fluke, a lucky bet. But the rest, I lost everything. The land was the only thing left and I was too proud to sell it. Too proud to go back to my father and admit he was right." He swallowed hard. The shame was a physical sickness. I felt I had betrayed not just him but the very blood in my veins. So I disappeared. I thought if I could erase Chi Jayok, the failure would disappear with him. The streets were easier than my father's. I told you so. He took a shuddering breath. Then he died. Suddenly. A heart attack. And the shame became a tomb. How could I, a failure, a man living on the street, step forward and claim the empire of a giant? I felt I would be desecrating his memory. So I stayed Kola. Kola had no past. Kola had no expectations. Kola could be kind because he had nothing left to protect. Tears welled in Adaora's eyes, but they were not tears of pity. They were tears of heartbreak for the lonely, punishing journey he had endured. She went to him, kneeling on the floor and taking his hands in hers. "You told me once that the city has no memory," she whispered. "But you were wrong. You became the city's memory of your own failure. You let it define you. I was nothing, he repeated, the core belief of a decade laid bare. No, she said, her voice firm, her grip on his hands tightening. You were not a beggar because you had nothing. You were a beggar because you believed you were nothing. And I saw the man you were, not the failure you believed yourself to be. I fell in love with the man who had the strength to survive that. I fell in love with Chi Jiok even before I knew his name. Her words were a key, turning a lock deep inside him. The fear in his eyes began to recede, replaced by a dawning, cautious wonder. The revelation, when it became public, did not just send shockwaves. It recalibrated the entire social landscape. The media, which had once sneered, now fell over itself to canonize their story. The Prince in Disguise. A love story for the ages. The narrative was flipped on its head, and Adaora's madness was now recast as brilliant, prescient intuition. Her parents arrived at the Yaba apartment, their demeanor utterly transformed. Where there had been fury, there was now a stunned, almost obsequious respect. Her father, for the first time, looked at Kola, at Chi Jiok, not as filth but as an equal, a fellow titan. The Masari legacy. Her father began, his voice uncharacteristically hesitant. To think it was here all along. Kola looked at him, his gaze steady. The legacy was never the money, Chief. It was the lesson. A lesson I failed until your daughter taught me its true meaning. It is not about building an empire to prove your worth. It is about using your worth to build something that matters. With the ghost of his father finally laid to rest, Kola stepped into his birthright. But he was not the chastened son returning to claim a throne. He was a new kind of leader, tempered in the fires of hardship and guided by a moral compass forged on the streets. He merged the vast Masari industrial holdings with the Nwadike Empire, but the new conglomerate had a soul. They dismantled exploitative practices, invested staggering sums into employee housing and education, and used the undeveloped Abuja land not for a private estate, but for a state-of-the-art, publicly accessible hospital and innovation hub. Their legacy became the talk of the continent, but not for its size. It was celebrated for its conscience. They had proven that true class is not in a surname or a bank account, but in the kindness of a handkerchief offered to a stranger. They showed that the most valuable fortunes are not those inherited in boardrooms, but those built with resilience, empathy, and a love discovered in the most honest, unexpected places. On a dusty curb, where a billionaire heiress and a billionaire beggar found a truth richer than any of their dreams.